Welcome to APQC's webinar on environmental sustainability and logistics. We'll be looking at the current state of selected practices from recent APQC research. I'm Marisa Brown, Senior Principal Research Lead for Supply Chain Management at APQC. And when it comes to environmental sustainability, I've recently completed a certification in sustainable supply chains from MIT's Center for Transportation and Logistics. Today, we're going to start with a little bit of background on the research that forms the basis for this presentation. Then we'll delve into the detailed results of what we've learned, and I'll end with some links for where you can learn more. So to start, APQC in 2022 gathered data and insights from 1,157 organizations around the globe. Quantitative data like corporate performance measures and metrics, as well as qualitative data on key practices. And in this presentation, we're going to focus specifically on cross-industry practices in environmental sustainability. We'll look at areas like fuel consumption, screening logistics providers, packing materials, the sales order delivery process, and reverse logistics. Okay, so let's dig into what we've learned. We're going to start with packing materials. So the current state of packing materials that are being consumed, we see, and when we look at it, we see some encouraging news. We see quite a bit of movement toward recycling and reusing materials. The dark blue bars show that at the median or the midpoint, 50th percentile, our research participants report that 80% of the total annual packing material that their organization is using is coming from recycled or reused materials. And that's great news. That drops only slightly to 75% at the bottom, or the 25th percentile, and increases to 90% at the top, or 75th percentile. So it is very much a common practice to be using recycled or reused materials for packing. Now, where we don't see as much progress is in terms of using materials that come from renewable sources. At the median, only 60% of packing material fits this category. Now, using recycled or reused material is certainly better than using virgin or single-use, one-time only use packaging. Consuming less packing material overall is even better. And if the materials are needed, then it is best that they can come from a renewable source, or at least we want to see that they can be recycled or reused. Another way that organizations are seeking to improve their environmental sustainability is by reducing carbon emissions. And to reduce those emissions, many times they're trying to reduce their fuel consumption and the miles or kilometers that are traveled, which go together. Making only one trip to a customer to deliver an order is preferable to multiple trips to that same customer for a single order. And what we see is that organizations are definitely trying to consolidate their sales order deliveries. And respondents in our research report that at the median, 75% of their sales orders are being delivered in one delivery, which means that for a quarter of them, 25%, they require multiple trips or multiple deliveries to a customer for a single order. And just for comparison, when we look at the top performers here, they're able to accomplish 85% of their orders in one delivery. And at the bottom, we see only 72% of orders are being consolidated. So this is an opportunity for organizations to really use their routing and try and figure out ways that they can incent their customers to allow them to make it so that all their order parts and pieces come together at once. Now, these deliveries that we're talking about are often handled by a third-party provider. And these third-party logistics providers contribute to an organization's total picture of sustainability. And in fact, increasingly, we see that legislation is requiring organizations to disclose the carbon emissions, not only for their own vehicles, but also for those that are part of what we consider scope 3 emissions, the extended value chain. So we gathered some data on what percentage of their new logistics providers organizations are screening using criteria related to environmental sustainability. And what we see at the median is respondents are screening only 42% of new logistics providers against this. And when it comes to their existing providers, are they assessing and reassessing on a regular basis to see how they do in terms of sustainability? And they're only assessing about half, 50%. That's just slightly better than their new providers they're bringing on board. And it's important to consider here that organizations are facing pressure from multiple sources to ensure that their supply chains are operating in a sustainable manner from end to end. And when I say multiple sources, the media, the government, consumers, multiple stakeholders are looking for increased sustainability. And organizations that do not track or assess the sustainability of their logistics providers may be left scrambling when some of these scope 3 disclosure requirements, again, those from your extended value chain, become not just optional, but mandatory by law. And additionally, we're starting to see anti-greenwashing laws, right? You can't just say that something is sustainable, you have to prove it. As these laws are increasingly becoming a reality, companies are going to need this data as evidence of sustainability from their providers. So even more broadly, if your organization has publicly stated its commitment to environmental sustainability, and we see these statements being made all the time, by 2035, we will be net zero, things like that, then you need to be prepared to demonstrate that you're actively working with your logistics providers to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And I will say it's just not possible to do that if you're only screening 50% or fewer of your providers against these criteria. As end-to-end supply chain transparency is becoming a business necessity, requiring your organization to evaluate the critical environmental practices of new and existing logistics providers becomes mandatory as well. Now, the last mile of delivery is typically the least efficient and most complex part of the supply chain. And here's an area where organizations can also reduce their emissions, and it's by increasing the utilization of their vehicle capacity. In other words, we're looking at the percentage of the available capacity, so how much room is in your truck, how much of that is filled when the vehicle is loaded at the departure destination or the departure location, whether it's a plant or fulfillment center, and then departs to deliver the product to the final destination. So what we see here is the average vehicle capacity for vehicles is 85% at the median. It rises to 90% and drops down to 77% at the 25th percentile. But here's a case where higher is better. A fully loaded truck and an empty truck both emit carbon. And so making sure that your organization is loading your trucks as much as possible is another step to take in the battle against greenhouse gas emissions. And to power your truck, to fuel it, we're seeing that renewable energy from alternative fuels can play an important role as organizations are looking to reduce their emissions. Consuming fuel from renewable sources, though, is not yet currently a widespread practice. As a percentage of the total fuel that's consumed in transportation and warehousing, we see that only 7% is coming from renewable sources at the median. And that doesn't rise much. It only goes up to 10% at the 75th percentile and drops down to 5% at the 25th percentile. So this is an opportunity as organizations are continuing to explore ways to improve their sustainability, that they can look at alternate fuels as a way to improve their carbon emissions. And then lastly, I want to talk about reverse logistics. Returns, going backwards. This also can play a role in helping an organization reduce its environmental footprint. So when we look at the percentage of total annual logistics and warehousing costs that are associated with the physical transportation, storage, or handling of returned product, right? That's your reverse logistics. It's typically quite low, totaling just 5% of costs for those at the median. Now, as we see e-commerce increasing, which we have been specifically since 2020, this percentage is increasing as well. Currently, only about half of respondents, 54% at the median, are using the same network for both reverse and forward logistics. And as supply chains become more circular, this will likely change, we can hope. There's a lot of efficiencies to be gained by using the same network, both forwards and backwards, for when it comes to reducing carbon emissions. So if you want to see the full data report on this topic, APQC members can download it from our resource library. We also have industry takes and industry reports on these same practices, and you can see how your industry compares to others in the collection that's linked on the screen. If you have any questions, I invite you to contact me, and I hope you found this content useful. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.